What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Optimize Your Life podcast. Today, I am joined by Shane Keegan. How are you, Shane?
Not too bad at all, Peter. Yourself?
I'm not too bad now. This one's been a long time coming now, to be fair. I don't know if many of the listeners know, but Shane actually used to coach me many years ago when we were under 14, 15, I think under 16 as well. So for those people then maybe that haven't followed your career, obviously you're involved heavily in Irish soccer. Do you want to give us a brief idea of your journey so far and where you are with your coaching career?
Yeah. I suppose if you go back to the start, initially, I suppose I was a failed footballer. Was always absolutely obsessed with soccer, but just wasn't fantastic at playing it. My brain knew what I wanted to do, but my body wasn't cooperating. And I would never have played anything above for the local club, really. A couple of representative squads here and there. That's about the height of it. But would have went straight from kind of playing for our under-18s in my local club, Galway United in Rathdowney, to the following season managing the under-18s kind of straight away, almost through default. And enjoyed it, really enjoyed it, to be honest with you, and kind of caught the bug very, very early on. And from there, where do you, I suppose my moves between where I was at alongside the various different coaching badges I was doing. I did my Kickstart 1 when I was about 19, I suppose, thereabouts. Worked away with the local clubs, as I say, youth team, managed them for 2 years. I went off to Australia then for a year. And it was only when I got back that it kind of really took off as something more than something you would, do one training session a week and have an old game at the weekend. It became a bit more serious. When I got back, it's gas, obviously, another guy that you know quite well. The next 4 or 5 years tied in very, very much with a guy from my local town called Ross King. When I got back, Roddy was only about 12 at the time, but the under-13s didn't have a manager for the coming season. I was approached, would I take the under-13 team at the club, which I did. Quickly became apparent very, very quickly that Ross King, from what I could see, I hadn't a whole lot to compare him to, but from what I could make out, he appeared to me to be one of the best 13-year-old or 12-year-olds in the country. So he did. And yeah, over the next few years, he would progress on to county level. I would end up managing or coaching or managing county teams. He progressed on to regional development level. I end up coaching in regional development centres, that kind of stuff. So we were kind of aligned with each other for quite a while. Obviously, it's at that level that I would have met yourself at county squads and that kind of crack. So yeah, really enjoyed that. Tipping away with the qualifications, did the Kickstart 2. Probably youth cert all during those couple of years until I got to about 24, 25, about that thereabouts, and then started to think, right, what is the next step here? Where does somebody go? And maybe, as much as I'm enjoying it and working with guys like Sean Maguire and Mikey Drennan and fellas like that, I had a bit of a hunger to get involved with adult teams. Now, I was doing the adult teams at my own local club still as well. I managed to initially the reserves and then the first team, but I was hoping looking to get involved at a higher level, and went Googling and was very surprised to find out that there was a third tier at the time to the League of Ireland called the League of Ireland A Championship. And not only was there a League of Ireland A Championship, but there was a team on my doorstep in FC Carlow in the League of Ireland A Championship. So did a bit of research on them and basically picked up the phone and rang the chairman, introduced myself, told him who I was, and asked him was there any roles that needed filling at the club. And he told me that they were in their off season. They were getting ready to come back for a pre-season, and they currently didn't have a manager. He told me that I was only 26. He had no intention of me being the manager, but did I want to come down and take pre-season for a couple of weeks while he was looking around for a manager? So I did. I went down. I took pre-season with them 2, 3, 4 weeks, and by the end of 3 or 4 weeks, he kind of turned around to me and says, "Here, listen, you seem to have a half-decent handle on this. Go on, have a crack at it yourself." So I found myself managing in third-tier League of Ireland at 26 years of age. I was 2 years there before taking over at Wexford Youths in the League of Ireland First Division at 28. Had 6 fantastic years there, followed by 2 years at Galway, year and a half at Galway, technically, and then was out of the game for almost about another year and a half before I've ended up where I am at the moment, which is Dundalk, where my job title and job description seems to change every week, but I'm enjoying it all the same. So that's I suppose the not so brief synopsis of it.
So there was a good period of time there where you were managing a career and still trying to get your badges and essentially coaching, from what I could see, 5 to 7 days a week, most weeks as well, traveling from Laois down to Kilkenny. Like, how did I suppose the switch flip for you, where you actually got your first paid position? You realized, okay, maybe this is going to be an actual career for me? Because a lot of the time, like nowadays, people are coming out with sports science degrees, coaching degrees, and are becoming a full-time coach pretty early on. But you were very, very young and still weren't sure whether you could make a living from this. But now, obviously, you're making a living from it. Like, when did that actually happen for you? Was it at Carlow or Wexford, or when did that start to become apparent?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's two answers. There's the when did I see it as something I could make a living from, and when did I actually start making a living from it. And I suppose from early on, I would always have been fairly ambitious, I suppose. And I know that sometimes doesn't go down too well, but I would have been, and I would have, from 22, 23 years of age, maybe I would have been thinking, right, how am I going to end up as a League of Ireland manager here? What have I got to do? And the problem was, I suppose, Petey, was whenever you're trying to do something, you try and find somebody who has done it previously, and you have a look at their career path and right, how can I not mimic it, but how can I take ideas from their career path to try and do it? And there just aren't a huge amount of examples of fellas who went from having no playing career to doing well in a managerial sense in Irish football. But yet there might have only been 2 examples, but there were 2 fantastic examples, and they were Brian Kerr and Stephen Kenny. 2 guys I've got to know extremely well over the last 10 years, and 2 guys who've been very, very good at offering me advice at various different junctures over that time. So I did as much reading on the 2 of them men, to be honest with you, as I possibly could, and tried to maybe steal a bit from the way they had gone about things. But yeah, I mean, you know, this might sound ridiculously busy, but you played in a game for me where we played against Wexford. You were maybe about 14. We played against Wexford. We went back to a pub in Kilkenny that day for food after the game, and Mick Wallace had been manager of Wexford's under-14s that same day. And I'll be perfectly honest about it. I made sure after that game in that pub that I'd never spoken to Mick before, but I made sure in that pub that I bought Mick a pint and sat down and introduced myself to him and had a bit of a chat with him and all of that kind of stuff. Like, my main reason for that was Mick Wallace was the chairman of a League of Ireland football club, and I needed to grab this opportunity to make a positive impression on him, in the hope that 3, 4, 5 years down the line, when I was looking to apply for the manager's job at Wexford, that he'd, you know, maybe have had a positive impression of me. So those ideas, and there probably was a 4-year gap between me buying Mick that pint that day and Mick actually offering me the Wexford Youth job. But you do kind of have to grab these opportunities to make impressions on people who can help your career path whenever you can. You know, networking is maybe a dirty word at times, but it is a very, very important thing to be able to do to try and help progress your career path. In terms of it actually becoming a full-time thing, yeah, it's very straightforward. I was at Wexford for 6 years. For the first 4 years, big part of the reason why Mick gave me the job, actually, I suppose, was that I never looked for any money. I told Mick, the day I sat down with Mick to discuss about possibly taking over, I said to Mick, I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this for ambition and career progression and all that. I said, if you can give me a fuel card so that I'm not spending my own money driving around the country, tower games, watching opposition games, if you can cover me with a fuel card, that's it. I don't want another penny off you. And that was how we operated for 4 years, pretty much right up until the day that we won the League of Ireland First Division. And what I'd say to people, Petey, is those years where it's not even to do with age, those years where you don't have massive commitments, i.e. wife, child, you need to try and give as much of your life to your progression as you possibly can. And that's what I was doing, because for those 4 years, I was getting up in the morning. I was driving from Rathdowney to Naas, an hour's drive. I was working from 9 until 5, where I was sales manager in a newspaper. 5 o'clock, I was jumping into the car, driving down to Wexford, 2-hour drive, down there for 7, start a session for 7:30, finish around 9. By the time you do a bit of video work with the players and all that, players are leaving around 10. You're probably not out of the venue till 10:30, and a 2-hour drive back home. So I was getting home around 12:30. That was 4 days a week. So that was...
I vividly remember us winning, I think it was a quarterfinal or semi-final, under 14 or 15, and the following week we had a week off, and you were like, to myself and Ross, it was like, we're going down to watch the opposition semi-final somewhere like 3 hours down the country. I was like, this is like, looking back at it, it was absolutely, the work ethic, like, it was crazy. Even when you were with Galway, some of the stories like of going to watch opposition, not good enough to watch it on TV for you ever. It was always, you had to be there.
Yeah, I suppose it comes to the fact that I actually enjoy driving. I do enjoy driving and using that time for thinking or for podcasts or all of that kind of crack. But my point is, that was all manageable. Roisin had come along somewhere in the middle of all of that, but even Roisin was fairly laid back towards it all. The big thing was that in 2015, the year we actually went and won the league, Conor was born in January of that year. And now that was a game changer, because it was just... like, in theory, that was the best year of my career. We were 50-1 at the start of that season to win the League of Ireland First Division. We had it won with 3 games left. And from that side of things, it was fantastic. But from the other side of things, for want of a better way of describing it, I was an absentee father for almost the whole first year of my son's life, which is just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And full credit to Mick. When I went to him at the end of that season and said, Mick, this is just not doable anymore, I'm afraid, not with Conor around now. He said to me, yep, agreed, right, let's talk about how we can make it work to make you full-time, and did give me a full-time contract, in fairness to him. Yeah, and I've kind of, as I say, between Galway and Dundalk, I went back to a normal 9 to 5 for a little over a year. But apart from that, I've been pretty much full-time employed in one role or another in soccer now for nearly 5 years.
Yeah, so that 50-1 season, obviously very successful, and your position at Dundalk now, obviously recently, has been really successful. Do you want to talk to the listeners then maybe a bit about the adversity then, that piece in the middle with Galway United where things didn't go as well for you? I know you're pretty open and honest about it, and we've had discussions about it offline as well, but what can you share from that experience for maybe people that are up-and-coming managers? See a lot of people in the GAA that are coming out the early 30s and think they're going to, win championships and transform cultures of GAA clubs. But it's when they get, dealing with chairmen, dealing with committees, dealing with funding, and things don't go their way. What value could you give to them from that experience?
Yeah, a couple of things on it. I suppose the first point I'd make is that professional football is being a manager in professional football is an absolutely crazy situation. If you think about it from the outset, essentially, like 9 times out of 10, the only way this relationship ends is with you getting sacked. 9 times out of 10. Even the successful managers will be successful for 3-4 years before then getting sacked. St. Mirren sacked Alex Ferguson. Everybody gets sacked. And like, even going into sit down to do up my contract at Galway, the advice I was given, which might sound a bit cold and clinical, is that yes, you'll negotiate your wage, and yes, you'll negotiate the length of your term in charge and all of that kind of thing. But the number one thing you are negotiating when you sit down to do your contract is, what happens the day you sack me? Because that day is going to come. You're going to sack me, and we all need to know what happens the day you sack me. So it is a very, very cold and clinical world from that side of things. And you just have to be okay with the fact that that's what you're signing up to. You're signing up to something that inevitably is likely to deal with you being sacked somewhere along the line. But what did I learn from it? Strangely enough, even though we got relegated in the first season, by and large, if you go back through my notes and my recap even at the end of that season, by and large, I'm reasonably happy, and this might sound mad considering relegated, I'm reasonably happy with the job I did in the first year. I kind of stuck to my principles. I went very much about doing the job in the manner that I believe in. I had a fantastic dressing room who gave me everything I could have ever asked for them. One of the best dressing rooms I've ever had, and getting relegated doesn't change that. They were brilliant, tremendous leadership from a guy called Colin Horgan, who was my captain. Some real solid characters in Ronan Murray, David Cawley, guys like that. But we were slow to get moving, and by the time we were flying it in the second half of the season, we just left ourselves with a bit much to do. So there were lessons to be learned. I'm not saying there weren't, but the difference is in the second season's failure and me eventually getting sacked was all on me, 100% all on me. And the reason it was all on me is because I abandoned every belief and principle that had stood me in such good stead.
Was that the pressure then because of that first season going down, and then suddenly you can't stick to your principles anymore because you're just trying to get that 3 points?
I wouldn't even say it was the pressure of having gone down. I'll tell you what was the pressure of, PT. It was the first time in my life where I'd been managing a team who were favourites to win something. So because we'd just come down and because we had one of the bigger budgets, we were the favourites to win the first division. Now, going right back to when I managed Ross King at under 12, Clover were a little team out in the sticks. Nobody ever expected them to do anything. Our Kilkenny sides, we were never expected really to be favourites to go and do anything. Wexford, certainly never favourites to do anything. All of a sudden, this was a whole new situation for me to be in. And I didn't handle it well, particularly in terms of my recruitment. I mean, I would have always have prided myself on recruiting based on personality and character and get the right people in and all of that kind of thing. Whereas now I was looking at the squad and I was going, I don't know if there's enough quality here for us to go and win it. And then you identify 2 or 3 people who that they're not a good fit for what you're trying to do personality wise. And that it's a gamble at best. And where you would never normally take that gamble, I was signing 2 or 3 players that I just knew, I suppose I was signing them on the thought process of, if we get off to a good start and everything's going well, then I don't think there'll be any issues. Yeah. But I mean, that's an awful gamble to be taken.
A good way to start off the conversation.
Yeah, it's an awful gamble to be taken. And No, and then you start to doubt yourself, and then you start to change the way you do things, even in terms of your training and your communication and all of that kind of thing. And the phrase, you can't see the wood through the trees. I lost sense of who I was. And look, I'd still make the argument that, we were a week away from the transfer window. I had a couple of, I knew who I needed to move out. I knew who I needed to move in. I still think if they'd left me there through that transfer window, I could have turned things around enough that we would still have gone up. But can I understand why I was given the bullet when I was given the bullet? Yeah, of course I can. We were 4th or 5th in the table when we should have been 1st or 2nd,
And what about the setup there? Obviously, they were down a division. What sort of style of manager did you try and set yourself up as? Were you trying to manage it as a business and have, first team coach, have a technical coach, or were you doing what your bread and butter is your actual on pitch, whistling them out, that kind of Stuart Lancaster style? Or were you sitting back and trying to manage it a little bit more?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big issues. There's no doubt I was trying to do far too much. And in fairness to the board at Galway, the people who are involved are fantastic. And that's why it still grates me that Galway didn't work out a bit better for me, because there's some really fantastic people involved with Galway. The problem is there's so few of them. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's so thin on the ground in terms of bodies to do stuff. So, I mean, I'm spending big chunks of my week organising the food. Where are we going to get the food? How are we going to get the food to the venue? I'm driving over to the other side of the city to pick up the food, leaving my house an hour earlier than I should to make sure that I can collect the food, to bring the food with me. In the evening, I'm going from house to house, viewing houses to see, can we find houses to put the non-Galway based players into? I'm trying to find all the residential, places for them, all of that kind of stuff. Then you're trying to do the club, or trying to grow its presence in the community. You're trying to make sure that you're at all the different clubs that doing workshops for players. And I definitely, it did become a case that the tail was wagging the dog, no doubt about it. I started to lose sight of the fact that not that I was losing, I just had no choice, really. But I needed to be stronger. I suppose in my head, I was thinking, if I do all this stuff, everybody will see how much I care about the club and how I'm trying to do everything possible. But really, I needed to be stronger. I needed to turn around to those who were on the board and say, listen, we need a chief of operations or somebody needs to row in here, lads, and take some of this workload off of my back. And yeah, definitely, that would be one thing I would change, is just to be a bit stronger on the whole thing, and just be adamant that more people needed to take the non-directly football related things off of my plate.
And then that break you had after that, was that like it left a sour taste in your mouth to some extent, and you deliberately took a break, or was it just harder to get a position after that?
Yeah, definitely no sour taste in the mouth, to be completely honest about it. I in terms of hanging your head is even too strong of a phrase, but in terms of maybe wanting to shy away from being seen, or, you know, keeping yourself away from people a little bit, that never happened to me after getting the sack at Galway, to be honest with you. I always took getting the sack as not a badge of honour, it's probably too strong of a phrase, but it's something that happens. It's happened to the best managers in the world. You know, Carlo Ancelotti is a fella I'd particularly align myself to. I love his way of doing things. I mean, Carlo Ancelotti has been sacked nearly 10 times, you know. So that wasn't a problem. We had a particularly horrendous defeat in the playoff with Wexford against Drogheda. I went into complete hibernation for about a week after that one. That was probably my toughest moment ever in football, all right. That's the only time I've kind of shied away from it. Though I would have been sussing out what opportunities were there pretty much within a week or two of finishing up at Galway. It's just the case that unfortunately there's no football industry in Ireland. There's probably, it's crazy to say, but outside of the FAI roles, there's probably maybe 20 full-time football positions in Ireland, which is just insane. So you're looking around and you're waiting for opportunities to come. I did very, very nearly went in at a first division club. What are we now? 2021, 2020, about halfway through 2019. Very, very nearly went in, right down to the last minute, nearly went in, and something changed at the last moment in terms of a first division club. And that is something that's not a regret, but I would have liked to have seen how that would have went maybe if that had happened. But no, I was looking straight away. I got doing quite a bit of media work, which I really, really enjoyed during that period. I did go back, as I say, in fairness to my previous employers, the employers I had left to go full-time at Wexford, they actually came and asked me would I go back to them. So I actually went back to them in the intervening period. But yeah, start doing a bit of media work, was writing a weekly column for the Times, which I absolutely love doing. Start doing a good bit of bits and bobs for off the ball and all of that. So one, that's enjoyable, PT. Two, it's a few bob coming in. And three, it keeps you in the circle. You know what I mean? You're still out there, you're still being heard of, and I think that's very, very important for out of work managers to try and keep the face out there in some sense or another, you know.
And then talk to me about coaching and managing. Obviously two very different things. You've done both. I suppose I have my opinion of what I think your real strong suit is when I actually have been coached by you. I think like you're one of the best coaches I've ever had. Easily, you know, like the stuff that we were doing back then, looking back with all the education I had now, like it was way ahead of its time. It was, you know, I remember watching Chelsea play and you were clipping the Chelsea Champions League and showing us exactly the shape we were going to be playing, how we were going to defend. This is exactly how we were going to beat these so-called bigger teams, because at the time I think Chelsea were not as good as where they are now, and they were beating teams in Europe 1-0 at home and away from home, and they were a really good side. But what is your preference, and I suppose what are the differences, and where you see your failings in maybe either one? Okay, well,
the first thing I'd say on that is, and there's a big lesson in this in itself, like you're in fairness to you, you're trying to compliment me there, right? And you're actually not, right? And I'll tell you exactly why, is because, so if you were adults, well then everything I was doing with you is what I should have been doing with you. what I've learned since is I was treating 13, 14-year-old footballers as mini adults and focusing on ye tactically and ye trying to win
and we
games
loved it.
instead of you might have loved it, but there wasn't enough. Yeah, but like nowadays, if I saw a coach like that, I'd be giving out about them, because at that age group, it should be about the winning has to play second fiddle. It has to become about individual improvement. And I can sum it up very easily for you in one short story. I think you would have had a couple of training camps under Niall Harrison. Niall was the Irish international manager at the time. And we sent, the year before you got involved with us, actually, we had sent about half a dozen players into an Irish international trial. And only one of them had made it. And we were quite surprised. We thought more than one would have made it. And I had a decent relationship with Niall, so I was able to phone Niall up and not have a go at him. Absolutely not have a go at him. I was just wondering, how come the lads hadn't shown better of themselves in these trial games. And his answer to it was, Shane, when you say jump, they jump, and it's if you want them to jump off a roof, they'll jump off a roof, and that's been very successful for you because you tell them exactly what they need to do on the pitch, and they do it, and you win games. But when they turn up at a trial and they don't have you barking at the sideline and making every little decision for them, they're lost. So I created a team of robots rather than a team of footballers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so, like I even remember when we stepped up, when you had me at that inter-county level, when we stepped up and I'd go into those camps, I even felt that probably at that age, I was like, I'd come back to you and I'd say, where would you rate these players against the players that we have? And you would say, he'll be as good as X that we have that I'd be training against. But the technical ability just was so different. Like, where I would be coming in to try and tackle a guy who was playing hold midfield and I was trying to dispossess these guys, and I dispossessed most of them, but these guys were just wriggling in and out. They had this turn, that turn, and it just, even when it went to England, then it was even worse because you just didn't have the skill set. You just weren't playing at that pace, and they just had every single out in terms of keeping possession. You just couldn't get the ball off them. It was just it was demoralizing at times, and maybe that's something that is another example of I just couldn't get to that level.
And that's what I'm saying. That's on me to an extent, because I had taught you how to be cogs in a machine rather than footballers or individuals, if that makes sense. But I do love coaching. I absolutely love coaching. I honestly couldn't answer to you whether my skill set is better aligned with coaching and management. I love both sides of it. I really, really do. I think when an opportunity arises for me to go back into football management, I've done a huge amount of trying to upskill and trying to educate myself, and I'm looking forward to my next crack at that. But the only problem is when you're on that side of it, it is almost impossible to do that side of it and be on the grass as well. And at the moment, I'm loving coaching. I absolutely love coaching. I'm not 100% sure which. Obviously, there's huge differences. Absolutely huge difference. The only real massive commonality I'd say between the two of them is relationship building, is the cornerstone to both. It's absolutely the cornerstone to both. But outside of that, I mean, I have seen tremendously successful coaches who just aren't suited and haven't done overly well in management and vice versa,
And I know we mentioned networking being a dirty word, but something that you definitely have a strong suit in is relationships, and some of the players that, from 10, 15 years ago that you were coaching are still in touch with you today. What are some of the things that you've learned from the likes of Ancelotti or from your upskilling or even your own personality that you've brought on in terms of building relationships? How do you go in to a Galway United or a Wexford Youths and not know these guys, and within 3 or 4 months, as you said, we would jump over a wall, we would do whatever you said,
Yeah, the challenge, probably, to be perfectly honest about it, Petey, for me is maybe the other side of it is knowing where the line is and when the distance not a distance isn't a great word, but where that line is. And, I have allowed myself maybe to get too close to players, which can then affect your decision making when it comes to having to make harsh decisions with them. The empathy side of things and seeing things from another fella's, putting yourself in another fella's shoes, that's something I've always tried to do. And I'm not saying don't do that, 100% do that. And that the reason I say that is because that would be the big thing for Ancelotti. Ancelotti is massive into empathy, seeing things, putting yourself in another person's shoes, seeing things from their point of view all the time, all of that kind of stuff. It's actually the other side of it. It's the strong points of an Alex Ferguson, a Brian Cody. They're the elements that I need to try and develop a little bit more, to be honest with you. So they are that ability to be really, really tough when the really, really tough side of you is required. You know, I would take things probably a little bit too much to heart. You know, I could have a sleepless night over the fact that I have to tell a fella who's given me absolutely everything for the last 3 months that he's not in the team on cup final day or that kind of thing, if that makes sense. And you need to learn, if you're going to be involved in sport, when people think about getting involved in sport, they think about all the really, really good stuff. But if you're going to be a manager or somebody who makes these tough calls, they're really, really not enjoyable. They're really, really not enjoyable. And it's the really, really hard part of it. And you need to learn how to still be able to have a good night's sleep the night you've done that or the night before you're due to do that. And like nowadays there's a book or there's a book for every downfall that you have almost. And I would have read an awful lot in the last couple of years on conflict management. I would say I'm not a guy who naturally embraces conflict. And now that I'm conscious that I don't naturally embrace conflict, I've tried to read up on conflict and how to handle it better. And, you know, not that you go looking for conflict, but you certainly don't avoid it. You certainly don't shy away from it, because it's part of sport. 100% it's part of sport. It's part of coaching. It's part of management. There's going to be conflict in so many different scenarios. You need to learn how to handle it and how to feel comfortable in it. And you never have to enjoy it, but you do have to know that you can handle yourself in those kind of situations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You're doing some work there at the moment with Dundalk. I know you mentioned your role is changing, but you did one that was quite interesting, something that's probably a little bit more in vogue now in football. I can see it definitely coming into GA is opposition analysis. Obviously, that is very, very different to being on the pitch coaching and being the manager or the head coach. What are the learnings there, and what have you, I suppose, what was the role for people maybe that haven't seen that before?
Yeah, I love it. I would always have been kind of into the geekier side of soccer like that, or all sports really, to be honest with you. Yeah, look, it's very, very simple. I suppose it really came into its own when we went into Europe. The League of Ireland is so small that everybody knows everybody, really, so they do. So there's not a huge amount that you can give players in terms of the opposition they're about to face in the League of Ireland. But when you go into Europe, I mean, you think about it. Imagine getting ready to play against a team that you have literally know zero about. You've never heard of any of their players. You know nothing about their strengths, their weaknesses. You are starting from ground level zero on it. So first and foremost, there's a massive workload in it. You're probably going to watch 6 full 90 minutes to get an idea, at least 6 full 90 minutes of that opposition, just to start getting a handle on what their philosophy is, what their shape is, all of that kind of stuff. And that's before you start the work, which is starting to detail every individual player, starting to detail how they like to play in the first third, the middle third, the final third, how they like to defend in the first third, the middle third, the final third, set pieces. And then you move on to step 3, which is, okay, well, now how do we visualize all that? How do we create clips that paint pictures that help the players understand all of that? And that's essentially what is opposition analysis. It's you are tasked with presenting pictures and information to players that helps them be more equipped for the task that they're about to take on, i.e. playing the opposition. But I've loved it. I've really, really, really enjoyed it. I never ever thought I'd be able to tell you so much about KI Klasnak and Sheriff FC and I put it this, the one I've used, the one I've said before is I never ever thought that the role would involve sitting down to watch Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher on Monday Night Football to see what are they saying about Arsenal, because we have them on Thursday night. You know,
that's crazy. It's crazy, yeah. I remember texting you about that, and I was like, "This is surreal."
Yeah, it was. But as you can imagine, hugely, huge. And the one thing I'll say here as well, PD, is the players have been incredibly receptive to it. They really, really do take it on board. They ask a lot of questions, one-on-one scenarios, or in our, we're lucky we have a great facility for showing all our content here on site with Dundalk. They're very engaging. I was chatting on News Talk the other day, talking about how, say, going into the FAI Cup final, it was great to talk about Shamrock Rovers, and this is what they do, and this is how we're going to try and deal with it. And then you have players kind of saying, okay, so what happens when Jack Byrne goes here? Because Jack will go here. What way are we all going to move at that stage? And that kind of engagement and to and fro on it all. And they're very, they make you feel valued and important. They're very quick to tell you if you put on a good presentation. They're very quick to tell you as they're leaving the room, Shane, thanks a million, or Shane, that was really good, or can you give us a little bit more on that? But yeah, it's been different. Look, as a football manager, you have to do it anyway. And at Galway, because I didn't have a full-time analyst, you're kind of doing a large part of your role is opposition analysis anyway. But to be doing it where it's the mainstay of your role, as it was for the whole of 2020, was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and just to touch on there, the analytical side and even the, I suppose, more analytically minded coaches, like, what's your thoughts on the likes of, Jim McGuinness and yourself, obviously dabbling into different sports, even Pat Critchley from Laois as well, doing basketball and GA. Like, it seems to be becoming more prevalent in more sports that they're welcoming ideas from other sports, but not only that, professional coaches are moving to other sports as well.
Yeah, and to me, it's a no-brainer. To me, it's an absolute no-brainer. I mean, I think to coach a sport, first and foremost, you have to understand coaching. And I think once you understand coaching, I'm not saying getting a deep knowledge of the sport is easy, but it's probably easier than getting a deep knowledge of coaching. I think once you have that understanding of how people learn, how people take information on board, how you put that information across, I think once you do that, then learning the intricacies of an individual sport is, to my mind, it is the easier part. And I love the transferability. I really, really do. It's something I'd been massively into. I was lucky enough to do 4 sessions with Corofin footballers in 2019. The guys up there were really, really progressive. They were just looking for a different voice, I suppose, and a different angle on things. Davy Morris, who's an incredible coach up there with Corofin, he kind of believed, you see, if you think about it, different sports place emphasis on different parts of their sport. And I suppose his take on it was, for all the things that are really on the money in terms of Gaelic football, he thought that this idea of spatial awareness, scanning, decision making, he was hearing an awful lot more about that being worked on in soccer than he was about it being worked on in Gaelic football. So in his head, well, okay, how do we go about working on that? Sure, we'll bring in a soccer fella and we'll see what he has to say about it. And, that's it. And by the way, you could try something like that and it could completely flop. And maybe I put on 4 sessions for Corofin and they might say 2 of them were of tremendous value to them and 2 of them weren't worth a shite to them, But by chancing stuff like this, as you say, there has been more examples. Obviously, Pat Gilroy has now done Dublin's hurlers and their footballers. That crossover between Gaelic football and basketball, you can definitely see why people are looking at that. I think by and large, it's perfectly honest, it's not something I'm into, but I think an awful lot of people are looking at a hell of a lot of what's going on in American football, trying to see if there's anything that can be taken from there and applied to sport here. But yeah, I love it. I've gone to see. We've been blessed in Laois over the last couple of years in terms of we've had some of the very, very, very best hurling coaches around. We've had Derek McGrath with our minders last year. We've had Niall Corcoran with our seniors for the last 2 years. 2 of the best guys you could ever watch. I go and watch their sessions, and I have an interest in getting involved in hurling myself somewhere along the line. So I'm partly watching them because of that. But I have seen them put on practices within a session where I've gone to myself, I can easily adapt that to be a very, very worthwhile soccer practice session, and have done so. Or it might be other stuff you're learning, like maybe you see how Derek McGrath uses a water break within a training session to get a message across, and you're thinking, yeah, that's really good what he's done there. I can steal that idea and I can apply that to my coaching. It doesn't necessarily have to be the technical side of what they're doing. So, I mean, learning from other sports, it's a no-brainer, absolute no-brainer to me. I would have read about coaches and managers from probably 5-6 different sports. Mickey Hart's book is probably the book that transformed my thinking in terms of when I read it way back maybe 12 years ago. It was after reading it that I kind of realised I'm only doing this to a Mickey Mouse half-arse level, really, compared to what he's doing when you saw all the stuff he was doing. So yeah, it's a huge part of it. I think it's brilliant to delve into other sports.
And it'd be great for you maybe just to give some more advice there to up-and-coming coaches, young coaches that were in your position. Like, what would you be suggesting to them to do now to improve their craft, particularly like they have a lot of time on their hands now working from home and stuff like that? Like, what were the really key elements that you implemented to make your practicing a little bit better?
Okay, I suppose my big hobby horse on this one is I have an issue with people initially focusing the majority of their energy on the academic side of it. Initially. In an ideal world for me, it's practical. Go and do it. Go and coach. Go and coach as many sessions, particularly, as I say, if you don't have a wife, a child eating into your time, if you're of that age, go and coach 7 nights a week. Go and coach 7 nights a week at various different levels, across various different sports. Just get involved wherever you can get involved. Ideally, try and do that for a year or more before then deciding, okay, now I need the academic knowledge here, so I do. But I just think you're so better positioned to take the academic knowledge on board if you know the reality of what's out there, of the reality of the situations that you're going to face when you're coaching. Now, again, ideally, you should be practically coaching while you're doing your academic studies as well. And now when you come out the other side, I think you will apply what you've learned a hell of a lot better, because, you know, I've spoken before. Let's say you're doing a qualification in strength and conditioning. Okay, you will learn every minute detail of what you should be lifting, what you should be doing, all of that kind of stuff, right? You come into a dressing room. You take our dressing room, for example, here at Dundalk, right? Fantastic fellas, okay? But it's a dressing room full of alpha males, okay? Who all think they're top dog. There's some egos there, naturally enough. They think they know best. And this is any dressing room, okay? If somebody walks into that dressing room, I don't care what knowledge you've got. Unless you're able to be an authoritative figure within that dressing room, you're in trouble. If you're coming in and you're stuttering and you're stumbling and that kind of stuff, and, you know, nobody seems to tell them in college, when you tell him to lift that, what do you do if he says no? Because that will happen. That will absolutely happen. They will not just go, oh, well, this fella has a qualification, he must know what he's talking about. They might say, no, I don't see the value in that. I don't like doing that. And all of a sudden, the poor new fella is standing there starstruck or like a statue, and he doesn't know what way to react. So get your hands dirty on the practical side of it as early as you possibly can. At 18, 19, you are not too young to be coaching and even managing teams. Absolutely not. And I just think then, when you've had real world experience, your ability to soak up the academic side of it when you go off doing various qualifications, be they through your governing body of your sport or be they through college, I just think you'll soak it up so much better then.
Yeah, like when I even think back to the discussion we had in lectures for our undergrad compared to the one that we did together at the Masters, like the discussion is completely different, because these were all people with experience that were questioning everything and were going, that doesn't work. You know, you can't do that with that team, or you can't do that with a ladies team, but you can do it with a men's team. Like, it was so, the discussion was, there was so much more depth to it because people had been out there and done it. Whereas at undergrad, you're just taking everything as, you know, this is the gospel, and you go out and it all blows up in your face in your first internship, and you know, that's life, I suppose. But what are the other things I wanted to discuss with you were some selfish questions. Like the state of Irish football at the moment for you. Like there's obviously a lot of stuff with books being released and you know, media reports and stuff like that. Like in an ideal world, like what does it look like for you to improve the infrastructure and to improve, I suppose, like we had when I was involved, it was emerging talent programs and regional centres. Like what does that look like maybe in other countries, and what would you like to see implemented in Ireland?
I'll start with a positive, because obviously there's so much negatives around it at the moment. It's very, very easy to zone in on the negatives. I think the move to underage League of Ireland teams has been fantastic. I mean, it seems complete and utter common sense, and everybody would say, well, sure, why wasn't that always the case? But it is hard to believe that only 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, League of Ireland clubs had a League of Ireland senior adult team, and that was it. That was the entirety of their structure. And to be fair, particularly the Dublin-based schoolboy teams held so much power that while everybody knew that it needed to move to the structure we have now of League of Ireland teams having a 19s, 17s, 15s, 13s, while common sense, I never thought it was going to be possible. I really, really never thought it was going to be possible. So for all the things that have gone wrong in the last 7-8 years, that has been a massive, massive positive. It really, really has. You look at the setup that, I know there are arch rivals at the moment, but you look at the setup that the likes of the Shamrock Rovers has, and in fairness to the Bohemians, again, another terrific underage setup. And look, we're trying to get our house in order here as well in Dundalk at the moment on that side of things. We're probably a little bit behind the curve, but hopefully we're going to be playing catch up on that fairly quickly. The underage structure now is fantastic. It really, really is. And if you go even a little bit further back, I mean, you know, it's not that long ago that if you were from a small country town, you could be a fantastic soccer player and never get heard of outside of your own town. You know, it was too easy for talent to be bypassed. Whereas now, with all these structures in place, you're the best player at the club, you go to the county team, you're the best player at the county team, you go into a regional centre, you're one of the better players in a regional centre, you go into international trials. There is now a clear, proper pathway. And that mightn't sound like rocket science, but as I say, it's not that long ago that it actually didn't exist. So it is great that we have that in place now. I suppose we'd be here all day if we went into all the problems, but unfortunately, the biggest issue we seem to have at the moment is in the previous era. I won't use the person's name. We'll just call it the previous era, all right? Because
this podcast is not that big time. Don't worry.
Well, he can still, he'll find you. He can be pretty litigious. What I would say is, in the previous era, the money was there. Obviously, during Celtic Tiger period and the whole lot, money was there. It was absolutely there. And it's to everybody involved's shame that it was kept a million miles away from League of Ireland football. Kept a million miles away from it. It was all ploughed into international football. And, you know, like, if you take about it, just to throw the numbers at you, the prize money here for winning the League of Ireland in recent years has been €120,000. A draw in a Europa League game for us was worth just shy of 2 million.
Wow. That's
so it's, you know, it is absolutely ridiculous when you look at it like that. I think that the team that gets relegated from the Scottish Premier Division gets I think it's 860,000. So they're getting, like, whatever that is, 6-7 times more for finishing last than we're getting for winning it here. I do think, even though all our ills haven't been solved, I do think the will is now there in the FAI to treat the League of Ireland properly and to try and make massive improvements. The problem is the timing. The problem is the legacy they've been left with, plus the fact that we're going through a pandemic which is hitting everybody financially. The will is now there. Now the money isn't. So previously the money was there, but the will wasn't. Now the will is, but the money isn't. So unfortunately, League of Ireland is just going to have to grit its teeth for another 2-3 years, I think, and grind our way through it until the country and the FAI comes out of the current financial situation that it's in. And it is going to take 4 or 5 years probably. But I do think hopefully we are going to get to a stage where the will is there, and now there's a few pound there to put proper money into the league. And there's big opportunity at the moment as well, Peter, because the effects that Brexit is going to have means all of a sudden our best 17-year-old footballers are not going to be based in England. They're going to be in the League of Ireland. And if they're that good, they're probably going to be in League of Ireland first teams. I mean, we've seen it with Evan Ferguson, who, absolute insanity to a certain extent, but made his League of Ireland debut at 14 years of age, which is absolutely crazy. But at the same time, okay, that's a bit extreme. But I do look forward to seeing the best 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds playing first-team football, because going to England is great and full-time training setups is great and all of that kind of stuff. But I've seen so much, in the role. Part of my role is scouting and looking at players that have been recommended to us. And it's nearly pointless watching an under-23 Premier League game, PD, because yes, you'll see their technical level and all that kind of stuff, but you have no idea if that has braced them for the cut and thrust of of a real man's game of League of Ireland on a Friday night, where a fella is willing to cut you in half, and contracts for the following season are dependent on teams winning games and that kind of stuff. So I think a 16, 17-year-old coming into that kind of a setup, I think it will be great for the progression.
That's excellent. The last thing we wanted to have a bit of crack, I don't think I've ever asked you this or got the opportunity to ask you, but the World 11, we want to know exactly what your pick is. What is your World 11 and why?
Well, I think when you were sending me over the brief for it, I think you said to me of all time, but I think, to be fair to me, we'll limit it to...
You're not that old.
See, true enough too. No, I've looked at it from since I've been old enough to follow football and understand football. So I've even left Maradona out of it. And I've given myself to at least kind of the beginning of the 1990s, I suppose. That's a good way of putting it, actually, considering we're just coming out, I suppose, in 30 years. I've looked at it, and I've gone Buffon in goal for me. Very, very tight call between Buffon and Schmeichel. But I'd probably just edge it out for Buffon. I've cheated a little small bit in my back line, in that obviously Maldini was primarily left full, but he was also tremendous in his latter years when he moved into left-sided centre-half. Absolutely tremendous. So he was. So I've gone again with Italians noted for their defensive ability. Buffon.
My brother Des will be delighted with the first two. He's listening in America, so.
Buffon in goal with two more Italians in front of him in Cannavaro and Maldini as my two centre-backs. That year, I'm not great on years, but that year that Italy won the World Cup and Cannavaro won player of the tournament, he was absolutely incredible, absolutely. And I've always liked the fact that he's small for a centre half, and yet it never gets shown up. Fullbacks, I've gone with slightly different qualities in the two of them. I've gone with a Raider down the right-hand side. I've gone with Cafu. I just think he was absolutely phenomenal bombing forward. Whereas at the left, I've gone with the brains and consistency of Philip Lam. I think he's a tremendous footballer, absolutely tremendous. He could play in any position on the field for you. I have gone with two of the magic three in midfield. I've gone with Xavi and Iniesta. Xavi as my sitter, with Xavi with my sitter and Iniesta on one side, and I've topped off that trio with Zizou. Zinedine Zidane, he was just a genius and just gives you something completely different. Xavi and Iniesta will keep the ball for you all day long, obviously, and Zizou will produce the magic moments. And to me, the front three is a no-brainer. I'm sure people can maybe have different takes on it, but I really don't see how you can go anything outside of Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, either side of Brazilian Ronaldo. To me, those three have been miles ahead of anything else. There's been some other, obviously, tremendous footballers in the last 30 years, but to me, those three were way above. I'd go as far as to say, poor old Cristiano, you know, it just seems to be constantly thrown at him that, oh, he's not as good as Messi, oh, he's not as good as Messi. And in his entire career, he's had to listen to, oh, he's not as good as Messi. And look, I would have a bit of an obsession with Maradona. I've got a signed, worn Maradona jersey that's probably worth more than the value of my house, in my house. But yet, because of their consistency, because they've done it for so long, to me, Ronaldo isn't as good as Messi. But in saying that, I think Messi's the greatest player ever, and I think Cristiano Ronaldo is the second greatest player of all time. I really, really do. To have done it over the length of time he's done it, across so many different teams, so many different leagues. Look, he annoys me as much as everybody else when he goes into his little sulks and his little temper tantrums, and he does love the look of a mirror and all of those kind of things. But what a phenomenal... And I'd actually nearly argue that in terms of a role model, he's probably a more realistic role model than Messi, because Messi's is... I don't know if you believe in God-given talent, and I'm into the, you know, you work for what you get and all that, but he does. He is actually born with something that none of the rest of us have been born with, and it's hard to role model yourself on somebody who's just gifted, whereas Ronaldo is self-made. Ronaldo is 100% self-made. The hours that man has put in has been incredible, you know. But yeah, not a bad 11.
Yeah, no, it's a compelling argument. We'll see. We'll see if anybody can trump that. We might get that going maybe for any of the sports coaches we have on. But no, I really appreciate the time. The last two things were, you obviously have your own podcast with the 42 Win at Dominoes. If you want to maybe give a shout out to that, and there's also the coaching network that you have going. How can people get in contact with you to get a look at that stuff?
Perfect. Yep, no problem. Yeah. Really enjoying the podcast. A lot of similarities between the podcast and what you're doing here, to be fair. So there is, it's basically, it's me having a chat with a coach for about an hour, thereabouts, and essentially just trying to see how many nuggets we can take from them, you know, try and pull as much information that we can relate to our own coaching as possible. We've been lucky enough to have some really, really brilliant guys. I thought Pat Lam was particularly superb and engaging. Derek McGrath is a fella that I have a huge amount of time for and would listen to forever. Pádraig Harrington is just an experience, an absolute experience. Stuart Lancaster is probably Ireland's number one knowledge sharer, to be fair to him at the moment. He's been tremendous. So yeah, we did 16 episodes on the first season, and we've literally just kicked off the second season this week with Eamon O'Shea, who again is an absolute genius in hurling circles. So yeah, I think it's members.the42.ie. If you want to log on there. In fairness, it's a paid for platform, but in fairness to the device, it's €42 for the year. I mean, it's tremendous value. And on top of that, knowing that I was coming on here, they have furnished me with a code word. Code word of
that's when you
Dominoes.
know you've made it.
If you put in the code word Dominoes, all capital letters, that'll get you another £5 off. So it'll bring it down to €37 for you if anybody does want to sign up to that. And on the second thing, yeah, the coaching WhatsApp group was something that started off with probably a dozen people, and I think we're up in around the 100 mark now, and it's brilliant because there's people from so many different levels. There really, really is so many different sports, so many different levels. You're in it, you know the crack. It's just information sharing, letting people know about courses, letting people know about interesting articles worth reading, letting people know about everything and anything that might help them in terms of their coaching. You could have a busy day where a load of stuff might go up, or there might be go up for 2 weeks, but it's grand, and lots of different people, some prominent people feeding into it, and some people who might only be working at their local under-8s. So literally to get onto that, just fire me a text. I don't mind throwing out the mobile number or the email address or anything like that. It's 087 6577256. So that's 087 6577256. Fire me your name. Tell me that you've heard this podcast and you'd like to get stuck onto the WhatsApp group, and I'll just throw you a in. It's as simple as that, really. Yeah,
I'll put all that stuff into the show notes. But no, that was a really good episode. Really enjoyed it, Shane, and thanks very much.
We never thought. I was going to say 15 years ago. It's more than 15 now, is it? We never thought nearly. How long ago were those glory days?
Oh,
Oh, you're still young enough.
I'm 20.
15
I'm
years.
26. So 12
Yeah, you're
years.
only.
12 years ago since that Division Two game, you came down to watch me play against Line Celtic or someone. I think I can't remember, but
We never thought it would result in a podcast host interviewing a podcast host, did we?
well, I got a big shock when I went into the Masters about 10 years later and turned around and here you were. Hadn't seen you in 10 years. No, really appreciate it and best of luck for the coming months with Dundalk.
On the ball, cheers, Billy.